In a bustling city filled with towering buildings and vibrant streets, a woman named Azumi built her life. She was the kind of person who lit up a room with her presence. Her smile was radiant, her laughter infectious, and her heart as vast as the open sky. Azumi was known for her kindness, her generosity, and her unwavering dedication to her friends and community. She was the glue that held people together, the one everyone turned to in times of need. Azumi was an orphan who grew up in an orphanage. The orphanage was the only home and family she knew until she came of age and left to hustle and organize her life. Azumi met and married Frank Taylor, a handsome and ambitious businessman, when they were both young. Their love story had been the talk of the town. Frank was charming, confident, and full of dreams. He had swept Azumi off her feet with his grand gestures and promises of a life filled with love and prosperity. Their wedding was a celebration to remember, with music, dancing, and feasting that lasted for days. For years, they seemed like the perfect couple, a match made in heaven. In the beginning, their marriage was everything Azumi had hoped for. Frank was attentive and affectionate, always finding ways to make her feel special. He would bring her flowers for no reason, write her love letters, and surprise her with little gifts. Azumi, in turn, poured her heart into their home, creating a warm and welcoming space for their growing family. Their first child, Fortunate, was born a year after their wedding. Azumi was overjoyed, and Frank seemed equally proud. He would come home from work and immediately scoop the baby into his arms, cooing and playing with him. Azumi felt like the luckiest woman in the world. 2 years later, their daughter Peace was born. Life was busy but fulfilling. Azumi balanced motherhood with her work as a seamstress, creating beautiful clothes for the townspeople. Frank's business was thriving, and they were able to build a comfortable home on the outskirts of town. To the outside world, they were the picture of success and happiness. But as time passed, subtle cracks began to appear in their marriage. Frank's ambition started to consume him. He spent long hours at work, often coming home late and too tired to engage with Azumi or the children. When he was home, he was distant, preoccupied with his phone or the television. Azumi tried to bridge the gap, planning family outings and romantic dinners, but Frank's interest waned. The birth of their third child, Phineas, marked a turning point. Azumi's pregnancy was difficult, and she developed complications that left her physically and emotionally drained. After the birth, she struggled to regain her strength. Her body changed in ways she hadn't expected. She gained weight rapidly, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shed it. Frank's attitude toward her began to shift. At first, it was small, offhand comments. "You've let yourself go," he would say, or "You used to be so beautiful." Azumi tried to brush it off, chalking it up to stress or fatigue, but the comments grew more frequent and more cutting. One evening, after a long day of caring for the children and managing the household, Azumi dressed up for a rare date night with Frank. She put on a new dress, did her hair, and even applied a little makeup, hoping to recapture some of the spark they had lost. But when Frank saw her, his face twisted in disgust. "What are you wearing?" he sneered. "You look ridiculous. That dress doesn't even fit you anymore." Azumi's heart sank. She tried to laugh it off, but the hurt lingered. That night, Frank barely spoke to her, and the date ended in silence. The cruelty didn't stop there. Frank began to compare Azumi to other women, especially younger, slimmer ones. "Why can't you look like her?" he would say, pointing to a woman on TV or in a magazine. "I wish I had married someone who took care of herself." Azumi's self-esteem plummeted. She tried everything to lose weight, strict diets, grueling exercise routines, even fasting, but nothing worked. She visited doctors, who told her she had developed a hormonal imbalance after Phinehas's birth. It was a medical condition, not a lack of effort or discipline. But Frank didn't care. To him, her weight was a personal failure, a reflection of her worth. One evening, as the sun bathed their modest home in a golden glow, Azumi approached Frank with a heavy heart. Gathering all her courage and with a soft and trembling voice, she said, "We're running low on food. The children, they need more to eat. Can you give me some money to buy supplies?" Frank didn't look up from his phone. His face remained impassive, as though she hadn't spoken at all. Azumi waited, her heart pounding in her chest, until he finally let out a derisive snort. "Money for food again," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I don't see where all the food goes. Maybe that's why you keep expanding. You eat everything in this house." The words hit Azumi like a slap. She felt her cheeks burn with shame, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, but no words came out. How could he say something so cruel? How could he reduce her to this, a woman struggling to feed her children, a woman who had given him everything? "Frank, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This isn't about me. It's about the children. They're hungry. They need—" "Enough," he snapped, finally looking up at her. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or compassion. "I'm tired of hearing about food and money. If you can't manage the house properly, that's your problem, not mine." Azumi stood there frozen as Frank turned his attention back to his phone, effectively dismissing her. She felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand that he see her, really see her, and the pain he was causing, but she knew it would be pointless. Frank had built a wall around himself, and nothing she said or did could break through it. Quietly, she turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She would find another way to feed the children, even if it meant skipping meals herself. She always did. Azumi endured the pain in silence. She didn't want to burden her children or her friends with her struggles. She put on a brave face, smiling through the hurt and pretending everything was fine. But inside, she was crumbling. Frank's cruelty extended beyond words. He started staying out late, coming home smelling of alcohol and perfume that wasn't hers. He would ignore her calls and texts, leaving her to wonder where he was or who he was with. When she confronted him, he would gaslight her, calling her paranoid and insecure. One night after another argument, Azumi broke down in tears. "Why are you doing this to me?" she cried. "I've given you everything, my love, my youth, my body. Why isn't that enough?" Frank looked at her coldly. "You're not the woman I married," he said. "I can't be with someone who let herself go." One day, Azumi noticed a change in Frank's behavior. He started coming home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He would take phone calls in another room, whispering in a way that made her stomach churn. She confronted him, but he denied everything, calling her paranoid and insecure. The truth came out one evening when Frank didn't come home at all. Azumi called his phone repeatedly, but it went unanswered. The next morning he returned, unapologetic and cold. "I've met someone else," he said bluntly. "She's young, beautiful, and takes care of herself." Azumi's world shattered. She begged him not to hurt her that way, not to disrupt the union of their home, not for her sake, but for their children. She pleaded with him, saying, "I'll do all I can to make myself better, even if it means starving." But Frank was unmoved. "Have you looked at yourself? You think starving will help you? At this point, you need to join that with prayers. Ask for divine intervention," he said. "You look so fat and unattractive. I wonder if there is any man out there that can look at you twice, talk less of living with you in the same house." The final blow came on a rainy evening, the kind of night where the heavens seemed to weep alongside Azumi. The storm outside mirrored the tempest raging within her heart. She sat in the dimly lit living room, the children finally asleep after hours of fussing and crying. The house felt hollow, a shell of the home it once was. Azumi stared at the clock, its ticking the only sound breaking the silence. Frank was late. Again. But this time something felt different. A heavy dread settled in her chest, as if the universe itself was warning her of what was to come. When the door finally creaked open, it was past midnight. Frank stumbled in, his clothes disheveled, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. His breath reeked of alcohol, and his eyes were glazed, unfocused. Azumi rose from the couch, her heart pounding. She had seen him like this before, but tonight there was a coldness in his demeanor that sent a chill down her spine. "Frank, you're home," she said softly, trying to steady her voice. "Let me help you to bed." She reached out to take his arm, but he shoved her away with such force that she stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance. "Don't touch me," he slurred, his voice dripping with disdain. "I'm done with this marriage. I'm done with you. I'm done with everything that has to do with your sorry self." He slurred, "I've decided to be with her. She's young, beautiful, and takes care of herself. I don't want you anymore. I can't be with someone who let herself go." Azumi's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Frank, please, let's talk about this in the morning. You're not yourself right now." Frank let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and grating. "I've never been more myself," he said, his words slurred but cutting. "You should see this woman. She's young, beautiful, sweet, takes proper care of herself, and she's everything you're not." Azumi's world shattered. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in. She felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her, leaving her suspended in a void of pain and disbelief. "Frank, no," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please think about the children. Think about our family. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, anything. Please don't do this. Please give our family a chance." But Frank was unmoved. His eyes, once filled with love and warmth, were now cold and empty. "You're nothing to me now," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're an embarrassment, a burden. I don't want you anymore. Take your kids and leave." Azumi's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, sobbing. "How can you say that?" she cried, her voice breaking. "I've given you everything. My love, my youth, my body. I've stood by you through everything. How can you just throw me away like this?" Frank turned away, his face a mask of indifference. "You should have tried harder," he said coldly. "You should have taken better care of yourself. I deserve better than this." The next morning, Azumi woke up on the couch, her eyes swollen from crying. The storm had passed, but the heaviness in her heart remained. She could hear Frank moving around in the bedroom, his voice sharp and impatient as he barked orders at her. "Pack your things," he said, stepping into the living room. His tone was cold, his expression unyielding. "I want you and the kids out of here by noon." Azumi stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "Frank, please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where will we go? What will we do? I have no family, no money. Please don't do this to us." But Frank was unmoved. "That's not my problem," he said, his voice like ice. "You should have thought about that before you let yourself go. You're an embarrassment to me, Azumi. I don't want you here anymore." Azumi's heart broke all over again. She looked at her children, who were huddled together in the corner, their faces pale and frightened. Fortunate, the oldest, was trying to comfort his younger siblings, but his own fear was evident. Azumi knew she had to be strong for them, even if it meant swallowing her pride and her pain. She packed their belongings in silence, her hands trembling as she folded clothes and gathered toys. Frank watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When she was done, he handed her a small envelope. "Here's some money," he said. "It's all I can give you. Don't come back." Azumi took the envelope, her fingers brushing against his for the briefest moment. She looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the man she had once loved, but there was nothing, only coldness and contempt. With nowhere else to go, Azumi took her children to the orphanage where she had grown up. The matron, Mama Ngozi, welcomed them with open arms, but Azumi felt like a failure. She had worked so hard to build a life for herself, only to have it torn apart by the man she loved. As she settled into her new reality, Azumi vowed to protect her children from the pain she had endured. She would rebuild her life, not for Frank, but for herself and her family. Little did she know her journey was just beginning, and a new chapter of love, healing, and redemption awaited her. Life at the orphanage was difficult, but Hazumi did her best to provide for her children. She took on odd jobs, cleaning and cooking for the other residents. Despite her struggles, she never let her children see her cry. She wanted them to feel safe and loved, even in the midst of their hardship. One day, a young doctor named Dr. Evis Mensah arrived at the orphanage. He had recently been posted to the area and wanted to do something meaningful for the community. When he saw Azumi, he was struck by her warmth and resilience. They struck up a conversation, and over time, a friendship blossomed. Dr. Mensah was different from anyone Azumi had ever known. He was kind, patient, and genuinely interested in her well-being. When he learned about her struggles with her weight, he offered to help. "I think there might be a medical reason for this," he said. "Let me refer you to a specialist." Azumi hesitated at first, afraid to hope, but with Dr. Mensah's encouragement, she agreed to see the specialist. After a series of tests, they discovered that Azumi had a hormonal imbalance caused by her last pregnancy. With the right treatment, her weight began to stabilize and she started to feel like herself again. While Azumi was slowly rebuilding her life, finding solace in the orphanage and the kindness of strangers, Frank's life took a dramatic turn, one that would unravel the very foundation of his carefully constructed world. After throwing Azumi and their children out of their home, Frank had married Destina, the young, slim, and vivacious woman he had been seeing behind Azumi's back. To him, Destina represented everything Azumi was Nukot: youth, beauty, and a carefree spirit. He was convinced that with her he had found the happiness he had been missing. Frank and Destina's life together began with a whirlwind of excitement. They moved into a lavish new home, far removed from the modest house he had shared with Azumi. Destina loved the finer things in life, and Frank was more than willing to indulge her. He showered her with expensive gifts, designer clothes, jewelry, and a sleek new car. They traveled frequently, posting pictures of their glamorous life on social media, much to the envy of their friends and acquaintances. Within a few years, Destina gave birth to 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Frank doted on them, seeing them as the perfect reflection of his new life. He was determined to give them everything he felt he had missed out on with Azumi and their children. He enrolled them in the best schools, bought them the latest gadgets, and made sure they wanted for nothing. To solidify his commitment to his new family, Frank changed his will, ensuring that Destina and their children would inherit everything: his business, his properties, and his savings. Azumi and her children were erased from his life as if they had never existed. But Frank's happiness was short-lived. On a business trip to a neighboring city, his life took a catastrophic turn. He was driving late at night, the rain pouring down in sheets, when his car skidded off the road and crashed into a ravine. The vehicle burst into flames, and the impact was so severe that everyone assumed no one could have survived. News of the accident spread quickly. Destina was informed and she immediately declared Frank dead. The family held a funeral, inviting friends, business associates, and even members of the media. It was a grand affair, with eulogies praising Frank's success and charisma. Destina played the grieving widow to perfection, her tears flowing freely as she clutched her children. During the funeral, Frank's will was read aloud. As expected, Destina and her children were named the sole beneficiaries. Azumi and her children were not even mentioned. The crowd murmured in surprise, but no one dared to question it. Frank's legacy, it seemed, was secure in the hands of his new family. But Frank was not dead. Miraculously, he had been thrown from the car before it exploded, landing in a thick bush that cushioned his fall. He was badly injured, his legs crushed, his face burned, and his memory fragmented. But he was alive. Passers-by found him hours later, barely conscious and mumbling incoherently. They rushed him to the hospital, where he was admitted in critical condition. For 6 months, Frank lay in a hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness. His body was broken, and his mind was a haze of confusion. He had no memory of the accident or the events leading up to it. The only thing he could recall was his name and the vague image of a woman, Azumi, whose face brought him a strange sense of comfort. When he finally regained enough strength to speak, the hospital staff contacted his company, who confirmed his identity. They reached out to Destina, but she was in no hurry to see him. She had already moved on, convinced that his death had freed her from a marriage that had begun to feel like a gilded cage. When Frank was finally discharged from the hospital, he returned home, only to find that his life had been turned upside down. Destina was no longer the doting wife he remembered. She was cold and distant, her eyes avoiding his as she spoke. "You're not welcome here," she said bluntly. "I've moved on. The children and I don't need you anymore." Frank was stunned. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice weak but filled with anger. "These are my children. This is my home." Destina laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "Your children," she said. "Think again, Frank. They're not yours. They never were." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He staggered back, his mind racing. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. Destina's expression was one of cold satisfaction. "I've been seeing someone else for years," she admitted. "The children are his. You were just a means to an end, a way to secure the life I wanted." Frank's world crumbled. He looked at the children, the boys he had taught to play soccer, the little girl he had carried on his shoulders, and felt a wave of nausea. They were not his. They never had been. The shock was too much for Frank to bear. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, his vision blurring as he struggled to breathe. He collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing as Destina watched in silence. She called for help, but there was no urgency in her voice. Frank was rushed back to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with a stroke. The doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him, but the damage was done. He was left partially paralyzed, his speech slurred, and his memory fragmented. The once proud businessman was now a shadow of his former self. With nowhere else to go, Frank was taken to his aging parents in the village. His siblings, who had warned him against leaving Azumi, refused to help. "You made your bed," they said coldly. "Now lie in it." His parents, though heartbroken, took him in. They cared for him as best they could, but their resources were limited and their patience wore thin. Frank spent his days sitting on the porch, staring into the distance, his mind haunted by the choices he had made. Azumi, meanwhile, had found happiness with Dr. Mensah. They married and he adopted her 3 children, giving them the love and stability they had always deserved. Together, they had 2 more children, creating a blended family filled with joy and laughter When Frank recovered enough to seek Azumi out, he begged her to take him back. I was wrong, he said, tears streaming down his face. I lost everything because of my selfishness. Please, give me another chance. He found her living happily with Dr. Mensah, her children thriving in their new life. She listened to his plea, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and resolve. It's too late, Frank, she said gently. You had your chance and you threw it away. My children and I have moved on. We found happiness without you. Her children, now older and wiser, echoed her sentiments. We need time to heal, they told him. Maybe one day we can forgive you, but we'll never forget what you did. Azumi's story became a testament to resilience and the power of love. She had endured unimaginable pain, but she had emerged stronger, surrounded by a family that cherished her. As for Frank Taylor, he was left to live with the consequences of his actions, a broken man who had lost everything because of his cruelty and selfishness. And so, Azumi's life became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new. If you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales from the heart of Africa. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the spirit of storytelling alive. See you in the next video. Bye.